It arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer. A plain white envelope, marked from my father's notary, posthumous and official. Nothing about it felt ominous until I read the second page. My name wasn't there. Not as a beneficiary, not even as a mention. Just my brother listed as the sole heir. There was no confrontation in that moment. No slammed fist, no rising pulse. Just stillness. Like watching a familiar tree silently crack in half. A betrayal that had matured quietly, without spectacle. For years, I'd given him the benefit of the doubt. Trusted his updates. Assumed honesty. But this wasn't a clerical error or a miscommunication. It was intentional. And strangely, I didn't feel rage, just a shift. The kind that changes the direction of everything without making a sound. He assumed I'd stay quiet. That I'd let it pass. That was his first mistake. My name's Armin Whitaker. I'm the second son, the one who stayed out of family drama, kept his head down, and focused on building something real. I work as a structural engineer. Not the flashy kind of career people brag about at reunions, but the kind that builds what others take for granted. Bridges, systems, things meant to last. I'm 42 now. I've lived most of my adult life away from the town I grew up in, working across states, managing teams, solving technical problems that demand patience, precision, and long hours. That rhythm suited me. I never needed attention. Stability was enough. My relationship with my father wasn't warm, but it was stable. We weren't the kind to hug much or talk feelings, but we had a mutual respect, especially in his final years. He appreciated responsibility. He valued fairness, and he made it clear more than once that everything he had would be split equally between me and my brother. He didn't believe in playing favorites. What's fair is fair, he'd say. He meant it. My brother Kyle was always nearby. He stayed in town, made regular visits, ran errands for Dad when he got older. He presented himself as the loyal son, the one who was there. And from a distance, that was fine by me. I was just glad someone was helping. But I see it differently now. Kyle knew I wasn't around to watch the details. He knew I trusted him. And that trust gave him space. Space to position himself as the only one who mattered. What I called distance, he called opportunity. And what I saw as family obligation, he turned into leverage. He didn't just accept the inheritance. He rewrote the narrative to make sure there was only one son in the story worth remembering. And somehow, he didn't think I'd push back. It started the day we buried my father. The service was small, just a few friends, some extended family, and the two of us. Kyle stood next to me, barely speaking. His eyes weren't red, but his attention was scattered. I assumed he was processing it in his own way. Everyone grieves differently, and I didn't press him. After the service, we sat quietly outside the chapel. He mentioned he'd already started handling the estate stuff, as he put it. Dad left most of it straightforward, he said. I've got it covered. When I offered to go over the paperwork with him, he shook his head. There's not much to do, just a few forms. I'll let you know if anything needs your signature. It didn't sound suspicious at the time. Kyle had been there through Dad's final hospital visits, and I was still juggling out-of-state projects. I took him at his word. Maybe that was my first mistake, assuming proximity meant integrity. 2 weeks passed, no updates, no follow-up. I texted once, got a brief reply. All good, still waiting on documents. Then the silence stretched. By the third week, the notary's letter arrived. And that's when it stopped being silence. It became something deliberate. The filing listed Kyle as the sole heir. No mention of me, no shared division, no joint execution. He hadn't just submitted the will, he'd filed a notarized affidavit declaring himself the only legal successor. I went online, logged into the county court portal, and saw it with my own eyes. Filed and accepted. Attached was his sworn statement. I reread it twice to be sure I wasn't missing something. My name didn't appear once. Not as a co-beneficiary. Not even as a sibling. There's a kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin. It just sinks in behind your ribs. That's what I felt. Not outrage. Just this strange stillness, as if a curtain had finally been pulled back on a performance that had been going on for years. A conversation came back to me. One of the last I had with Dad, a few months before he passed. We were sitting in his backyard, just the two of us. He was quieter than usual, but clear-headed. "You and Kyle split everything down the middle," he told me. "I don't want tension after I'm gone, keep it clean." Those were his exact words, and I remember nodding, assuring him I had no interest in fighting over money. I meant it. At the time, I thought Kyle did too. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. Or so I believed. In hindsight, there were clues I missed. Small things. A reluctance to include me in Dad's appointments. The way he brushed off my questions about power of attorney. He'd even joked once, "You're always too busy working to care about this stuff." It didn't feel loaded when he said it. But now, it reads differently. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't oversight. Kyle knew exactly what he was doing. Filing early, filing alone, and doing it in a way that would leave no trace of me in the legal record. He didn't just cut me out of the estate, he erased me from history. And for a moment, I think he truly believed no one would question it. I didn't call him. Didn't send an angry message. There was nothing to be gained from that kind of reaction, not yet. I've spent years managing complex builds, overseeing teams under pressure, troubleshooting structural faults that don't announce themselves until it's almost too late. If there's one thing that job taught me, it's this. Don't move until you understand what you're standing on, so I stayed silent. Outwardly, I played it calm. Told a few relatives, let's give it time. Maybe there's a reason. No one needed to know what I'd read or how fast my thoughts were moving. Behind the still face, instead, I started mapping things out. I pulled out a legal pad, divided it in 2 columns, what I knew versus what I needed to confirm. Date of the filing. Type of affidavit, name of the notary. I checked bank access dates, pulled up old emails, even skimmed through the last text. Threads with Kyle. The deeper I looked, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a slip. He hadn't forgotten to add my name. He'd deliberately written me out of the process. Chosen the form that would keep me in the dark the longest. And he'd done it early, quietly, while acting like everything was still up for discussion. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I lost something, but because it told me exactly how he saw me. As irrelevant, replaceable, a legal obstacle to be worked around. But the more that thought settled, the sharper my focus became. This wasn't just about money, this was about identity, legacy. My father hadn't raised us to scheme, and I wasn't about to let someone turn his last wishes into a one-man narrative. Kyle saw silence as weakness. He'd forgotten what comes next when the quiet one finally picks up the pen. The first thing I did was dig through my email archives. Somewhere in there, I remembered Dad sending a PDF, an early draft of his will. It took about an hour to find it, buried beneath years of invoices and project updates. There it was, dated 2 years ago. With both our names printed clearly, equal beneficiaries, no conditions, no ambiguity. That gave me a foundation. I printed the file and clipped it to a growing stack. Then I called Dad's old accountant, a man named Harris who'd handled his taxes for nearly 2 decades. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. He answered on the second ring and remembered me immediately. When I asked if he had a copy of the final estate plan, he didn't hesitate. He always insisted on even distribution, Harris said. Nothing changed on our end. I still have the 50-50 draft in your file. That confirmed it wasn't just my version. There were others, impartial, time-stamped, documented. Dad had never intended to leave me out. My next stop was the notary office. I didn't go in with accusations, just questions, calm ones. I asked for a copy of the witness record from when the original will was first submitted. After a bit of digging, the clerk found it. 2 signatures, one for Kyle, one for me, the same date, same file. That proved we were both present when the estate plan was drafted, which meant Kyle had known undeniably that I was entitled to an equal share. But something had changed before the final submission. The document on file now was a stripped-down version. No joint names, no shared distribution, just a single heir affidavit, with my brother listed as the only successor. No explanation, no revision notice, just missing dot. When I pressed further, the clerk looked uncomfortable. Your brother filed a lost will claim, she said. Stated the original couldn't be located after your father passed, and submitted a replacement under oath. I asked if anyone had tried to contact me. After all, I was listed in the earlier draft. The clerk shook her head. We had your details on file, she said. Full name, address, phone, everything was tied to the initial registration, but there was no outreach. He filed solo, that sealed it. This wasn't a misunderstanding, or rushed paperwork. Kyle had waited just long enough, submitted a fabricated claim of a missing document, and pushed it through knowing I wouldn't be alerted in time. It wasn't even sophisticated, just opportunistic, relying on quiet timing and assumptions. Most people don't check court filings weekly. Most people don't question family. He was betting I wouldn't either. I left that office with photocopies, witness logs, filing receipts, the lost will, affidavit, and a copy of the certified email the notary had sent my brother when the submission was accepted. Every timestamp worked against him. Every document painted the same picture. That night, I laid it all out on my dining table. Dad's original draft, my copy of the email, Harris's statement, the notary log. One page at a time, the pieces fell into place. Each signature, each date, each silent omission built the full scope of what he'd done. And yet, none of this made me angry. Not in the way most people expect. What I felt was something slower, heavier. A quiet realization that someone I'd never competed with had been playing a different game all along. He wasn't just trying to take the inheritance. He was trying to rewrite the closing chapter of our father's legacy, with himself as the sole character. But the thing he hadn't accounted for, the thing that made all the difference, was that I'd kept my copies. Quiet doesn't mean passive. Trust doesn't mean blind. And the paper trail, he thought, would disappear. It was just beginning to speak. There was one more step to take, and I knew exactly who to call next. There was no outburst. No dramatic confrontation. Just a registered envelope sent out on a Tuesday morning, addressed to the notary's office, with every supporting document neatly arranged inside. My copy of the will, screenshots of Dad's emails, a signed complaint form filed with the registrar's office, every page labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. The goal wasn't to attack, it was to document. Let the system see what had been done. I followed that letter with a quiet consultation. I didn't look for a lawyer who advertised on billboards. I went to someone recommended by a former colleague, a probate attorney named Sullivan, soft-spoken and more analytical than aggressive. He didn't lean on drama. He leaned on process. That's exactly what I needed. We sat down and went through everything. The timeline, the filings, the original documents, the discrepancies. This isn't complicated, he said, reviewing the lost will affidavit. It's either fraud or a gross misstep. Either way, we start with official inquiries. We filed a request for clarification with the notary board. Sullivan contacted the registrar directly to confirm if any additional versions of the will had been submitted. There were none. And then came the next step, a formal letter addressed to my brother. It wasn't hostile. It simply requested a notarized statement explaining the basis of his sole heir claim, alongside the evidence used to support the lost will filing. No accusations, no demands. Just an opportunity for him to explain how his narrative matched the paper trail. That's when things started shifting. A week of silence followed. Then a message from Kyle popped up on my phone, short and vague. Can we talk? No details, just a soft opening. The kind people send when they feel the ground move beneath them. He hadn't expected resistance. Not from me. In his mind, I was always the one buried in blueprints, too distant to notice paperwork, too methodical to chase conflict. But what he didn't understand was that methodical doesn't mean indifferent. Every step I took was deliberate, every document preserved, every timestamp checked. I wasn't looking to destroy him. I was looking to restore the truth. Let the process speak louder than emotion. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the principle, about not letting my father's final act of fairness be rewritten for convenience. The more the official process unfolded, the clearer it became that Kyle hadn't planned for scrutiny. He had expected silence, maybe a late objection that could be dismissed as confusion or sour grapes. He didn't expect documentation. He didn't expect legal procedure. And he certainly didn't expect that I'd already taken steps before even calling him. Some people think justice comes with sirens or slammed doors, but more often, it arrives in the form of calm letters, carefully filed complaints, and a voice that doesn't shake when asking for accountability. That was the path I chose, and it was already working. It was 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday when Kyle got the call. I wasn't on the line, but I had a good idea of what was said. The notary board had begun their internal review that morning. Sullivan had submitted the full packet 2 days earlier. Notarized copies of the original will, the email thread with my father, the witness signatures, and a formal inquiry about the legitimacy of the affidavit Kyle had used to file as the sole heir. At 2:29 p.m. I got a message from Kyle. No subject, no build-up, just 3 words: "Can we talk?" I waited 20 minutes before responding. Told him I'd be at Haverside Calf around 6:30 if he wanted to meet. No accusations, no tone, just logistics. He replied, "Okay." The cafe was quiet that evening. A few laptops open, some quiet, music humming overhead, the kind of setting where emotional confrontation feels out of place. Kyle was already at a back corner table when I walked in. He didn't stand. He looked up once, nodded quickly, and went back to pretending to read the menu. I sat down across from him and waited. He broke the silence first. "Listen, this whole thing's gotten out of hand," he started, voice tight. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." That line, misunderstanding, was something I expected. It's the kind of word that attempts to soften deliberate decisions, vague enough to avoid legal weight, soft enough to pretend there's no intent behind actions. I didn't respond. Just let him talk. "I wasn't trying to cheat you or anything," he said. "After Dad passed, I filed what I had. I couldn't find the original will. I thought it got misplaced during all the hospital visits. It was chaotic. Still, I said nothing." He leaned forward slightly. "It was never supposed to be permanent. I figured once we had everything sorted, we'd fix it. Split things like Dad wanted." That's when I placed the folder on the table. Nothing aggressive, nothing theatrical. Just a single copy of the original notarized will, our names both clearly listed. Witness signatures at the bottom, date and timestamp untouched. His eyes landed on it, and for a moment, he didn't speak. "I know you remember this," I said, quietly. "We sat across from each other at the notary's office when Dad signed it, to witnesses. Full division. You were there." He didn't deny it. Just deflected. "I thought that one wasn't valid anymore," he muttered. "There was some issue with registration. I don't know. I assumed we'd have to refile." "You assumed I'd never see the new filing," I corrected. He shifted. Again, clearly uncomfortable now. "Grief messes with people's judgment, Armin." I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't mean to. I cut him off gently. "It's not about what you meant, it's about what you filed. And it's not just between us anymore. The board has everything. They're reviewing the affidavit, the missing notifications, and the discrepancy in records." He went silent. There was no threat in my voice. No raised volume, just clarity. "Are you planning to press charges?" he asked, quieter now. "That's not up to me. The board determines intent. If they refer it to the probate court, then yes, it becomes a criminal matter. But right now, all I've done is present the truth." He exhaled, sharp and unsteady. For a moment, he looked like a man realizing he wasn't in control anymore. The kind of look people wear when they know the room has shifted and the floor beneath them is starting to give. I didn't think you'd go through all this. He admitted. Of course he didn't. That was the entire foundation of his plan. That I wouldn't notice, or worse, wouldn't bother. That I'd stay in the background, as I always had, while he quietly redrew the family story with himself at the center. I stood up to leave. I'm not going after you, Kyle. I'm just restoring what was already in place. He didn't respond, just stared at the table. Maybe at the will. Maybe at nothing. That as I walked out, the sun was setting behind the buildings across the street. No big moment, no crowd, just quiet closure forming in pieces. That call from the notary didn't just inform him, it shattered the illusion he'd built. The illusion that silence meant indifference, that trust could be leveraged without cost, and that I'd remain the quiet brother forever. He wasn't smiling when I walked in, but the call made sure he wouldn't fake one on the way out either. 3 months passed before the decision came through. The estate was formally frozen and re-evaluated by the court. A probate review confirmed the original will, the witness records, and reinstated the original 50-50 division. My share was restored, not by negotiation, not by sentiment, but by proof. Kyle didn't fight the ruling, he couldn't. The evidence left little room to maneuver. He received a formal warning from the registrar's office for misrepresentation of heir status and procedural manipulation. It stopped short of criminal charges, but the mark was there, permanent, on record. Publicly, everything remained polite. We didn't argue. There were no public fallouts or family group messages filled with confrontation. But privately, something shifted. He stopped making eye contact at gatherings. His voice dropped a few decibels around me. That usual confidence, the one he wore like a jacket, didn't fit the same way anymore. I didn't press for more. Didn't ask for an apology. At some point, you stop expecting certain people to understand the damage they've done. You stop needing them to. What mattered wasn't his regret. It was the restoration of something my father intended. My name, my role, my share. They weren't acts of entitlement. They were acknowledgements of belonging. And for a while, that had been erased. The money mattered less than most would assume. Of course, it helped, it always does. But what stayed with me wasn't the deposit. It was the document, corrected and filed, with both our names finally, where they were always meant to be. Sometimes, justice doesn't show up with noise. It doesn't always arrive in courtrooms or with raised voices. Sometimes, it comes in a quiet letter. A board decision. A corrected file. What I took from this wasn't revenge, it was reinforcement. That fairness matters, that silence isn't surrender, and that even the quiet brother can and should speak when it counts. My father once told me, what's fair is fair. He wasn't talking about just numbers, he was talking about legacy. And now, finally, his legacy stands the way he intended. Let that be the lesson. When someone tries to write you out, don't fight to be louder, fight to be accurate. Truth doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs to be seen.